Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says there is no housing crisis. Who does he think he's kidding? Not the tens of thousands of young people seeking their first home. These are the people locked out of the housing market by at least 5 forces which the government has failed to adequately address. First of all, the cost of homes, which have skyrocketed out of control for more than 5 long years. Secondly, the lack of land for housing development, especially in Auckland and Christchurch, which the government didn't even notice for the first 5 years. Thirdly, LVR restrictions limiting most people to 20% deposits. And, Mr. Speaker, that means a deposit something like $80,000, which very few people, young people, are able to afford. Fourthly, rising interest rates. Fifthly, excessive and badly controlled immigration, which national governments, of course, especially under that minister over there, are so famous for. And is the Prime Minister also kidding the people of Christchurch who are moving out of that city to Rangiora and Rolleston and further afield to seek affordable homes in sections? And those who choose to stay or who must stay have a real problem finding an existing home to buy at an affordable price, or cannot find a section at an affordable price. And the progress of repairs to earthquake-damaged or in rebuilding destroyed homes is far too slow. The fate of some properties in the Port Hills is still undecided by this government more than 3 years since the February 2011 quake. And the Prime Minister must also be kidding the people seeking a home to rent if he thinks there is no housing crisis, especially in Auckland and Christchurch. In Christchurch, the rental market is still utterly dysfunctional after 3 years of massive rent increases which few people can afford, and with a shortage which is getting worse as the influx of people continues to grow demand at an alarming rate. Rents of near to $1,000 per week for a 3-bedroom house are commonplace. New Zealand First called on the government to regulate rents over 2 years ago, but there has still been no action by an uncaring government. And in Auckland, not only has the government not addressed excessive rentals there, it has made the situation worse by pushing people out of state houses into an overheated private rentals market with its disgraceful social housing policy. And in other parts of the country, it is selling off state houses as fast as it can. That's not a recipe for solving a housing crisis. And I say to the Prime Minister, if all of what I have just said is not a housing crisis, then what is it? I know, it's another national government failure. The OECD report just released is sobering. New Zealand's houses are the second most expensive in the developed world, based on price relative to income. And our homes are the most overvalued relative to rents. So it's not just my opinion, it's not just what the people of New Zealand feel, it's what the OECD says as well. So, does the Prime Minister really think that if he tells bigger lies about this, the housing crisis, people will suddenly start to believe him? Well, I've got news for him, they won't. Constant denial will not work, not now, and not on the 20th of September either. People looking for homes want action, not some lame excuse by the Prime Minister or by Nick Smith. The government's budget measures this year barely touch on these crisis-sized housing issues. Its announcement to reduce the cost of housing by temporarily removing duties and tariffs on building materials is a drop in the ocean, saving about $3,500 on the average new home. The cost of homes in Auckland currently are increasing by something like a staggering $6,000 per month. So the government's generous $3,500 gift is not much more than 2 weeks of increases. The government caused the housing affordability crisis by allowing uncontrolled immigration and letting overseas buyers push up the cost of homes. It waited 5 long years before even recognising the problem, and has still done next to nothing to assist first home buyers while property prices have gone ballistic. With first home buyers pushed out of the market by LVR restrictions, young people need a much more stable and strategic approach to the problems of accessibility and affordability of homes, and this government has no ideas. The government's market-based approach cannot work in Auckland or Christchurch or elsewhere, where land availability is not solved just by housing accords or by attacking local government development contributions. Mr. Speaker, Local Government New Zealand figures show that local government development contributions average only 4% of the cost of a new home, so there again is another drop in the ocean. What the government's attack on development contributions shows is they don't really know what to do about the housing crisis, and what's worse, they don't really care. So in the absence of any worthwhile ideas, government ministers simply deny that there is a housing crisis. New Zealand First has been saying so for the last 2 years. We have argued for the last 3 years that immigration was a problem. I have asked questions in this House several times and made speeches saying so over all of those years. The government's immigration policy is an incomprehensible mess. It allows far too many people in who have no skills to offer. In fact, Chinese immigrants, only 28% actually have those skills, and the rest don't. That's how bad it's got. The government allows people to crowd Auckland when there is a labour shortage in Christchurch and elsewhere. It even allows immigrants to buy their way into New Zealand, giving priority to people with $500,000 so that they can buy a home here and then buzz off to Australia. The problem with non-resident overseas buyers is also a real factor in driving house prices up, and no denials by the Prime Minister will convince most people otherwise, because it is true. New Zealand First has revealed over the last 2 years how overseas promoters have advertised overseas and encouraged house buying in New Zealand. And there are many overseas buyers who own several houses here. One reported to me appears to own 77 houses here in New Zealand. It's time New Zealand First policy was adopted. We wouldn't mind if the national government stole yet another one of our properties, so I hope they're listening. We believe housing is a basic human right, so we want to establish a government housing agency to invest in land for housing where it's needed most, to sell smaller sections for smaller affordable homes to first buyers on a long-term repayment basis with concessionary interest rates. It's not enough to try to free up land zoning for housing. The government must be active in the residential land market if it's going to make a difference. The government has also failed to curb the explosion in home rentals, Mr. Speaker, especially in Auckland and Christchurch. Its market-based approach again has demonstrably failed, yet it will still not introduce any form of control in Christchurch where the market simply cannot cope. The budget provision of a staggering $64 million operating and $16 million capital dedicated to pushing people out of state rentals, especially in Auckland, into an overheated rental market is irresponsible and is useless in solving the housing need. That $80 million would be better spent on hundreds of new state rental housing. Mr. Speaker, the government's budget measures on housing were pathetic. It knows it. So now it simply seeks to deny that there is a problem, and that is even more pathetic.
The Honourable Nikki Wagner.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to speak on Budget 2014.